Hi, this is Paul. No Friday live stream this week. I got stuff to prepare for the week after, which is Midwestuary, so no Friday live stream. Sorry, there's only so much I can do. But we're going to start with Michael Martin, John Dee, and the Spirits. I first saw mention of this video on Twitter from John. He had John Dee and the Spirits, and I thought, I've never heard of John Dee. And John Dee and the Spirits, that sounded like a cool band name. And Michael said, yeah, it is. Michael is, I think, quite likely going to be at Southeastuary. I don't know if he's going to be at Midwestuary, but Southeastuary is starting to come together. But I found this to be a fascinating video. Let's begin.
Hello, friends. So today, I thought...
Let me get the sound right. It looks like the sound is right. It's just that he's not using a microphone that makes him sound like right there. It's a little bit echoey. I think that's it.
We could talk a little bit about John Dee. Dun, dun, dun. John Dee, if you don't know, was probably the most brilliant man to be alive during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I of England. He was he was everything. He was a polymath and a half. Engineer, mathematician, historiographer. What else did he do? Wrote a book on Euclid. But he's most known for being a magician, or being a dabbler in the occult arts, as they say, right?
Now, why did this grab my attention? Obviously, I've been talking about public spirits. I've been talking about the way in which modernity seems to be receding, and we seem to be traveling back through the 17th. Phoebus said, yeah, wait till we hit the 16th century. Well, it's helpful to read. Maybe let's go back a little bit. Rod Dreher's diary. I don't know if it's behind a paywall or not. It says paid, so I guess it is. Rod Dreher's diary was entitled "The Joy of 80s Nostalgia," and he talked a lot about growing up. And even though the line between boomers and Xers is 1965. I was born in 63, so Dreher was born in like 68. So we're separated by 5 years. But a lot of the memories and things that he talked about, I could very much associate with. I was in college during the 80s. And so that was fun, sort of listening to this, and one of the real points that he made was the world has changed. He talked about college in the 80s, which I went to college in the 80s. I started Calvin in 81, and there were no screens. As Dreher mentioned, there was a television screen down in the basement, but nobody watched TV. Eventually, VHSs and little TVs came up into people's dorm rooms. And the VHS was sort of a unique thing because you could watch a movie then in the dorm room. Otherwise, you were just stuck watching whatever crap was on TV. So nobody watched TV, and what you did was you hung out with your friends. And in college, sometimes we'd go to movies, but most of time was hanging out, listening to music, talking, pulling pranks, playing games, doing all this kind of stuff. And college, I lived in the dorms, and so I loved communal life in college. It was so much fun living with people, and we'd live together, and we'd eat together, and we'd go to class together. It was for me a heightened level of community existence, and it was awesome. I loved college. Now, he goes through most of that, and then he talks about Trump in Washington, D.C., because Dreher always sort of keeps up on the news. And then, note to Protestant readers, and if you listen to the live stream on Friday, anybody who's read Rod long enough knows how he is. He really tries hard to be open on his blog. Anselman took offense at some of the things that Dreher said on the Friday live stream. I'm sick of how he bashes Protestants, and there's a number of Protestants at the corner that get sick of the Protestant bashing, et cetera, and they're not always pleased with me because Sometimes they feel I don't hold up my side, even though I am a Protestant and I am deeply Protestant and I have absolutely zero plans on becoming un-Protestant. And I have plenty of critiques. There's, if you ask me, plenty of reasons why I won't be joining the Catholic Church or an Orthodox church anytime soon. And at some point, I probably should make a video about that, but that's not this video. And so he talks about that a little bit, but a lot of it, I mean, Dreer used to talk a lot about nominalism. That comes up sometimes for him now. It'll come up for Vervaeke sometimes now. And of course, Protestants usually get tagged with that. But Protestantism is responsible for democracy and secularity and all of those things. Personally, I like democracy. And while I have critiques of secularity, I understand its role and its place and its sneaky mission. And while I think we will see sort of a recession of secularity too, I think we're going to miss some of the things that secularity affords. It's also the case that I don't think most people that I know who sort of want to really lean in hard to critique Protestants really enjoy the fruits of liberalism. And again, we've done a lot of talk about post-liberalism and all of that, but you know, Nate was going off a couple of months ago about this, but there's a lot to talk about in terms of a critique of liberalism, and it's been interesting watching the way Doug Wilson is sort of he is a master of media. And when I look at how he has sort of managed this CNN interview with the news of their church plant opening in D.C., fascinating. He is a master of media. They really know how to sort of they know what they're doing in terms of dealing with media better than most other people that I see try to wrangle with media. Anyway, part of why I think it's helpful to look at John Dee and the spirits is that this is part of what happens in the 16th, 17th century. Let's keep going.
But as a matter of fact, I wrote one of the chapters of my dissertation was on John Dee. And so I've read everything, at least at that point I read everything about him and everything that he wrote, both in English and Latin. And I probably have a different take on him than most people. I mean, most people, I think...
That should surprise no one, because Michael Martin has a different take on many things than most people. That's just who Michael is. Now, I'm saying this, Michael and I have been together in two different estuary conferences. We were together in a small one that happened in Washington. Ooh, Joe sent me an email during the holiday. I have to find that one. Sorry, Joe, if I've missed you. We were together. That's where I got to know him first, at the Washington, D.C. conference, and then at the Northwestuary conference. And you know, we've had a chance to. It was sort of like college, hanging out with Michael. He's a great musician. He's got amazing stories. He's a ball to hang out with. You know, we've got some connections in terms of our stories, and he's just a really fun, interesting, fascinating individual, and we always have a good time together. So yeah, Michael, you you think differently from most people.
From, say, a conservative Christian side of things, think of him as a black magician and dabbler, or, you know, a horrible person, conjurer, and a lot of people while he lived thought the same thing. On the other hand, like occultist types, they praise him as like this, you know, great figure. But I understand why they would do that, because I think those are ideological stances on John Dee.
And so it's really interesting because Michael sort of sees the divide there. and says, yeah, hardcore. I live streamed a little bit of Chad was streaming today, and when I say TLC, there's a lot of people who listen to the channel that don't know what I mean by TLC. That's this little corner. That's this online community. We do live streams. We jump on each other's live streams. There's a lot of small channels. It's a flotilla. It's a whole thing. If you haven't dabbled in the thing, it's a lot of fun to dabble in the thing. But so some people would be like, oh, this is an occultist, that side of the line. And because he's on that side of the line for people, other people are going to be like, oh, are there going to be spirits? John Dee, are there going to be spirits involved? I want that. I love that. I like that. And they just sort of want to play with it. And if it's spooky or witchy or occulty or any of that, they're in. And of course, the other group are out. And so on one hand, again, I am a Protestant, and if someone comes to me and says, I really want to dabble in this stuff, I would say, I wouldn't do that, and I don't think you should, because I think it's actually dangerous, and actually this video is going to be in some ways in service of that, because Michael is quite clear here that this is a cautionary tale, and it's a good cautionary tale, I think, but it's helpful to remember that in different periods of time, this will connect back to my defense of Protestantism. One of the things that I think Protestantism has given us is a certain amount of caution regarding dabbling in the spirit world. Now, what do I mean by that? Because we've been talking about what we mean by spirit. And when I say it that way, it very much is, that way is very much framing it, because a lot of what I'm doing with some of my other videos is saying, yeah, we're all living in a very spiritual world. And sometimes when you hear that, people will be like, well, of course. I was listening to one video this morning. So as a response to the response I gave, some people sent me to some really interesting channels. I'm so ADHD, it's really scary. So someone said, and I think quite wrongly, because Oscar sent another comment, which I pinned there, and someone said, well, they probably want you to watch channels like Joshua Citarella and Andrew Callahan, neither channel I'd ever heard of. And then I found this video where they're talking together, and I thought, well, that's kind of good.
You're not going to believe what Andrew Callahan said. Andrew Callahan spills the beans.
I see no problem with that at all.
Okay, man, I just had to tell somebody. You're the first person I've told that. At the Million MAGA March, which is like the proto January 6th gathering, and dudes are trying to go live on Facebook and instantly getting their channels taken down.
Right.
So that's like their Tiananmen Square moment. You know what I mean? Where they're like, we must be telling the truth, because they are removing our shit from the internet. All these late night TV shows basically being like anti-Trump programming, that's reaching the living rooms of a lot of Trump supporters. Yeah. So imagine your Facebook's taken away, you turn on the TV and it's Jimmy Kimmel being like, and the orange asshole said this today. You're like, everything is fucking against him. Like, this is crazy. And that's the thing, is like, some liberals are so annoying that you become a conservative just by sheer, just by that. Like, real shit.
Beginning of this place rules.
Yeah.
Tell me about this why.
I mean, the why is kind of like the pipeline between, like, how does a regular, otherwise normal person fall like really deep down the, in particular, conservative QAnon rabbit hole, to the point where it like takes full control of their life and alienates them from their family.
So one of the important things with Oscar is that Oscar, when he said radical, a lot of us read radical. Now, Oscar is actually from Sweden, so English is his second language, although he's obviously very good in English. But radical can mean a lot of different things, because radical basically is a location, and he was much more talking sort of radical Christian rather than sort of radical American political, on the American political spectrum. And although it might be hopelessly ethnocentric, or at least national-centric, to think that everything revolves around grimy, silly American politics, every time I go to Europe, people just want to talk about American politics because it bleeds over into them. And hey, I get it. But so he's talking about radicalization. So this channel, and I thought that was quite interesting in terms of, okay, here's the default setting. And the default setting is basically what you get from mass media, what you got in your public school. That's the default setting. I also came across because of course I watched Britt Hartley, then YouTube decides that they have to serve up for me a sad story of this Mormon woman whose husband was living a double life, some kind of a sexual addict or something, and of course she was playing the... Now, again, the way that you dress these things up in language, the Mormon trad wife, and then she sort of had to figure out how to survive this. But that sort of bleeds into this idea that the default setting of American life is really sort of blue state realities. And because so much media is generated in blue state realities, blue states tend to control the media, tend to control the university. They don't control him, I'll tell you that much. But so now she's got a book deal and she's an influencer and she's on YouTube and she's got a Substack, and it's all about how her husband did her wrong and how Mormonism did her wrong and how she doesn't believe in religion and all of this stuff. And it's sort of like, it's one of these subtraction stories, this personal testimony where she leaves one of the little resistant communities that have been holding back the default state, and now she's joined the default state, so she's going to get a book deal and she's going to be an influencer and she's going to make her own money, and she's going to have an awesome life and everything's going to be great because her husband was a dirty, cheating dirtbag and really messed up her life. So now she's done with the Mormon church and she's done with Christianity. And of course, she's got one of her Substacks, which was behind the paywall, is a little bit by 16 Theses. And it's always so funny whether deconstructing from Mormonism or Christianity, when they always come out with their ideas about, they have their sort of religious list and they always act like, I've got these new ideas about religion, and it's like, what if there isn't a God? And what if we're just sort of out here as evolved apes, just making up life on our own? And what if there's no meaning? And what if there's, and I mean, every time someone comes out with this, like it's the brand new idea, it's like salt. You put it on the tip of your tongue, and it's like salty. I don't want to be mean or anything like that, but everyone always deconstructs to the default view that is obviously this large, blobbish set of assumptions about life. It's a religion, it's a culture, it's a worldview, it's all those things. So anyway, I think this is part of what we thought Oscar was complaining about, but probably wasn't what he wasn't really complaining about. And because the TLC talks about this stuff, he's bored with it and wishes that maybe we would spend more time with the Hutterites talking about their issues. And Julian sort of comes and goes. But I'm not to the point here that I was listening to this morning, thought, oh, okay, this is interesting, blah, blah, blah. And I really like the guy. I watched some of his news stories on his channel. One of them was about Albuquerque and fentanyl. I thought, yeah, that was really good. And because those are the kind of things that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, homeless people and drug addiction and all of that stuff. Let's have him talk a little bit more because he's going to say a word.
And I think I looked for easy solutions with the HBO thing, like, oh, they're consuming this media source, or they're buying T-shirts from Enrique Tarrio, and they're wrapped up in this economy, or in information economy too.
Yeah.
But I think that what I learned through Kelly is that a lot of times, like a traumatic family situation or like a chaotic or catastrophic economic event, oftentimes precedes that jump. So with Kelly,
so in other words, you've got all of these people that have grown up and been formed in this default religion, culture, assumptions, all of that. And then something bad happens to them and they become a Republican. Which, again, when you hear that story, it's like, wait a minute. I thought the default story was more the trad wife who grew up in some old religious practice, and now she's evolving and being liberated and set free to believe that there is no God because her husband was a dirtbag and her parents told her about God and it didn't work out for her. So now she's going to be an influencer and make money on YouTube and make money because this book. And so you have this funny situation where obviously there's a default setting to a culture. There's a default religion to that culture, and there's all these aspects to that culture. And the word I keep using with that is spirit. That this is a sort of a spiritual principality. It is, in fact, a spiritual reality, whether you call it the blob or the blue church or the cathedral. And then you can have the Mormon church or the Christian Reformed church or others. I mean, these are all spiritual entities. And part of what I've been talking about is that there is no setting which is not spiritual. And it's sort of a corollary on the axiom that was fed to me as a young Reformed lad going to Christian Reformed day schools, that all of life is religious.
Like, he lost his home shortly after the financial crisis because he took a loan from a guy who then seized the home as an asset when he couldn't pay back this $100K loan. And then
And of course, this really works because the default setting is that, I mean, Obama really said it fairly well, is that, if you play by the rules, if you listen to your teachers, if you get good grades, you're not going to be mean to religious people because religious freedom is important. So you're not going to be mean to Mormons and Christians and Muslims and people who do ayahuasca and the New Ager and the Catholics and then these weird Orthodox people who are coming around now wear these big black robes and big beards and have podcasts and symbolism and stuff. You're not going to be mean to any of those people because being mean is a sin in that blob, in that worldview. But it's just sort of a default atheism that's around here. And I thought John Vervaeke articulated that quite well in last week's Friday thing.
3 or 4 years, his life was a revenge quest against this lender named Bill. And then that kind of doesn't work. Trump comes around and presents this like good versus evil spiritual warfare framework, and he was able to...
And of course, Trump is kind of the sum of all evils in this worldview. And that's sort of the way you can detect someone who is, let's say, perhaps because of trauma or bad things, have sort of fallen out of belief with the blob, and so denounce Trump and all of his workings. Trump is sort of the Satan in the story. If you watched my sermon before, now he said the word once, but he didn't sort of have the way that it lands.
And his quest against this lender named Bill. And then that kind of doesn't work. Trump comes around and presents this like good versus evil spiritual warfare framework, and he was able to...
Because when he says spiritual warfare framework, that's sort of like the people against the blob. The people against the blob, like the Pentecostals and stuff, they have like spiritual warfare. They know that Tucson, Arizona is a dark city, so they go up on a hill and they pray and they fast and they ask and they try and get the name of the principality that is over the city of Tucson so that they can break the power of that principality. I mean, that's just those weird Pentecostals. And of course, they're Americans and they're nice, but at some point, we're waiting for their silly little worldview to fall apart, sort of like this pretty Mormon girl who married a dirtbag, and then they'll join the blob. And now where she has to, a terribly difficult situation, was she's got no money, she's got no hopes, so she has to go and make money on YouTube and stuff. But, she'll make sure that her kids get good education at public university or maybe get into the Ivy League school so they can get good jobs, so they can join the blob, so they can participate in the blob, and everything will be fine. And so one way or another, if we're nice enough and if we do everything well, the blob will just continue to blob and to grow and be in all and through all and be all in all.
To blend his personal tragedy and vendetta with like a grander spiritual one.
One of the things that I really appreciate...
He said it so fast. And you notice that sort of the two ways of the word are there.
A traumatic family situation or like a chaotic or catastrophic economic event oftentimes precedes that jump. So with Kelly, like he lost his home shortly after the financial crisis because he took a loan from a guy who then seized the home as an asset when he couldn't pay back this $100K loan. And then for 3 or 4 years, his life was a revenge quest against this lender named Bill. And then that kind of doesn't work. Trump comes around and presents this like good versus evil spiritual warfare framework.
Spiritual warfare frame. We put warfare on the end of it. Then it's sort of this Pentecostal word. And, Trump is then, if Trump is Satan in the story for one side, he's Jesus in the story for other people, or at least maybe the good bad man. He's John Wayne in the story. So that's the one use of the word spiritual, but
and he was able to
through the magic of YouTube. I never used this feature. Through the magic of YouTube, where is it? We can slow it down.
blend his personal tragedy and vendetta with like a grander spiritual one.
With a grander spiritual one. And this is what I talked about in my sermon last week, and it has to do sort of with this new... So that Britt Hartley video talked about the Isabel Burton book, Strange Religions, and the first religion is sort of wellness. And, they can't give up on this word spiritual, because to be completely non-spiritual would be like those really increasingly uncool atheists. Because if you really want to be cool, you're going to have to be spiritual. You may not be religious, but you're going to have to be spiritual. But back in the day, centuries ago, Sam on the Friday live stream, his pitch, and Annie's pitch, both of them have the same pitch, because that's what we're going to talk about at the conference too, is that we're still trying to figure out what this word spirit means. And John Dee, back in the day, he didn't have any question about what spirits meant. The spirits are all over, and we want to find God, and we want to know how the world works, and so spirits are the way the world works. And so if you look at animistic people, or people before sort of these axial religions kind of take over everything, your life is full of spirits. Augustine writes about this in the City of God, and that not only does the door have a spirit, have a god, but the hinges have a god, and the lock has a god, and the handle has a god, and so part of what happens in late antiquity is part of the reason they sort of, Constantine, before he becomes the kind of Christian he would become, he's looking for one God to rule them all, because pluralistic, polytheistic paganism is just worn out trying to deal with all the gods, and we need one God to rule them all. And then, of course, with Protestantism, the middle realm gets collapsed, and it's just God. You got angels and demons, but, they're rare occurrences. You can't give them up, especially in terms of the modernist fundamentalist debate, because they're in the Bible. And then, of course, charismatics come in, and they're all about angels and demons, and they sort of open up the middle realm. I've long told people that Pentecostalism and charismatic religion is not really a theological innovation. It's a cultural slide. It's a reaction and a rejection of certain aspects of modernity, but they're Protestants. And so part of what Protestantism does, and this is where I started this great detour, is it adds a certain discipline to the worldview. And that's why people like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins or a lot of skeptics, they're really Protestants. And that they're like Skeletto, the Nacho Libre's little skinny wrestling friend. I only believe in science. Which is a terribly funny movie. But John Dee, at this early period, and there's lots who did it, and the people have kept doing it all along, to the end of the 19th century, you get all these spiritists, and of course, LDS Church itself is kind of interesting in that most Protestants sort of firmly collapse the world, but the LDS church sort of opens it up, and you'll be gods over your own world, and all of this kind of thing.
But when I read, I read the whole everything, and I came away with a very different perspective that he's really a tragic figure. I think he was basically a good and decent man, but as we all are, he had his weaknesses. We'll talk about that in a second. But I think he was probably, from everything I've read.
Now, the reason how you can tell that Michael Martin is a really good YouTuber. Now, being a really good YouTuber does not mean success in YouTube, or that you make any money from it, or that your channel will grow big, or any of those things. But he's a really good YouTuber because he's just sitting here talking to us. He can take the stuff out of his eyes, and he'll hem, and he's just using the mic that's on his computer, I think, and probably just the camera on his computer. Nothing any better. He didn't sell out like me and get a nice Sony camera that actually keeps focus or anything like that, or have a mic here. He doesn't do any of those things. Anyway, I digress.
Very loving husband and doting father, really concerned with doing good in the world. And also a very devout Christian. Okay, that's important to think. Now here's the book that my dissertation turned into.
I'm going to pause it there so you can write it down and buy his book. I think it's a great title. Now, of course, people who watch my channel a lot know I love titling things. I get 100 characters from YouTube, and most videos I try to use them all, even though, again, if you want to grow a big YouTube channel, that's a bad idea. But here's the book cover, and there's the title, Literature and the Encounter with God in Post-Reformational England. That's an awesome title. Now, if you actually go to Michael's video, and you'll notice that I left some comments, and one of the comments that I scolded him on, he basically said like and subscribe at the end of the video, and I said that's not being a very good YouTuber. Being a very good YouTuber is doing like you did through most of the video. Don't succumb. Don't succumb to the sirens, to the spirits of YouTube that want you to seek success. Keep naming your books stuff like this. Fight those publishers.
Literature and the Encounter with God in Post-Reformation England. Available at fine booksellers everywhere. Was this 2014 or 2015 when this was published?
It's probably the only place you can get it is Amazon. I doubt there's any bookstore in America you can buy it. Sorry, Michael. I think it's just true.
It was published 2014. So that was a good year. It had 2 books come out in the same year. This and Meditations in Times of Wonder, my first volume of poetry that was published. So let me give you a little background with Dee and his what's called his.
We like background. We are here for the background.
His actions with spirits, and that's really what I want to talk about today, because I think so much of his work, especially in the latter half of his life, or the latter part of his life, arose from that. Both, there was not really anything very good, but tragically, it was potentially good, but it turned into tragedy. So what Dee was interested in for a long time, he did experiments with what's called scrying, 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 which is using a crystal ball to see into the spirit world. And now the thing here.
Now it's important to note that being centuries ago and believing in spirits and believing that spirit moved matter, that spirit moved earth, of course he wants to see into the spiritual world. Today, there's only some weirdos that want to see into the spirit world. What do we want to know? Well, we want to know the future. And how do we know the future? Like rationality and economics and, big IQ. That's how we know history. But he's going to use a crystal ball. Okay.
Here's the thing. Dee couldn't do it himself. So he had to find somebody to work as a medium for him. And he had tested out different guys. Took them out for a test drive. And one guy, one of the first ones was he had moderate success with was a guy named Bartholomew Hickman, I think his name was. But moderate success, and the guys who were good at mediums tended to be sketchy. And then he finally found like the ultimate medium, Edward Kelly. Now, Edward Kelly also had a sketchy past, right? He probably had his ears clipped for coining, which was coining was a kind of
Today he would have been into, I don't know, cryptocurrency.
Counterfeiting, where you would clip parts of coins and make new coins from them. And so the punishment for that was clipping your ears, right? So Elizabethans didn't play. Nevertheless, Kelly was a really accomplished or gifted is probably a better way to say it, scryer. And he and Dee engaged on this incredible project. Now, this is the part, it's like I find it very touching about John Dee, because part of what he wanted to do with the scrying business, I mean, he wanted to acquire wisdom, which you can't knock that, right? It's a noble aspiration. So acquiring wisdom would be to acquire not only knowledge about the world we can see with our senses, and of course Dee was before the Cartesian duality came on the scene in the scientific revolution. So not only the world of the senses, but the world we can't see. So it was at Dee's time, it was a totally legit area of scientific exploration. We would call it natural science or philosophical exploration. So
now he doesn't go into it, but that's a huge deal. In other words, he's trying to know his world. He's trying to understand how the world works, and he knows that spirits move the world, and so learn that. Now again, Protestants are going to come along and say, and Protestants are going to be skeptical about relics and skeptical about. A great book to read on this is They Flew, Carlos Ayer's books, because even the Catholics had some real issues with like levitation, because earlier on levitation, that was sort of the devil, but then they've got all these saints that they're trying to tie down, and they're flying and levitating and all these things going on. And so basically Protestants are against miracles. Protestants are against this stuff. So Protestants are the rationalists, the scientists. They're the assumption of the blob, or at least what will become the blob.
He wanted to do that, and one of his goals, and this is the part that I just love about him, one of his goals with doing the scrying was to find the language of Adam. And you'll see this a lot in magical circles on the internet and elsewhere, when it comes to Dee, that he recovered the Enochian language, or the language of Enoch, right, or the language of Adam. Now, the reason Dee wanted to do this is because he thought if he could acquire the language before the Tower of Babel, that it would help to restore Christendom. Because this is, of course, after the Protestant Reformation, where all of Europe was in chaos. Where in England had gone from being the most Catholic country in Europe to a kind of weirdly Protestant country, politically Protestant for sure, since both Henry VIII and Elizabeth, his daughter, were kind of basically Catholic. I mean, the way their attitude towards things, but business is business, right? So here's Dee.
Extra points for not cutting out the sip too. I mean, that's what it takes to be a good YouTuber.
Trying to acquire this, and in the course of this, well, he can't just find it. He has to find spirits that know the language and teach it to him. And that's this project that he was on for a long time. It never seemed to go.
And again, you can see why Protestants But isn't it reasonable that, well, if we want to find the language spoken before the flood, we'll have to contact spirits? Now, I want to be fair to the Catholics, because a good many Catholics would also say, the Bible has plenty of texts against divination. But, of course, Christians work in the spiritual world all the time. And who do we talk to? Who do we engage with? Who do we play with? We have lines and rules about this. And Protestants and Catholics have some different lines and rules, but they're, when they talk together, they're not that, talk about saints and Mary and stuff, but you could sort of talk about how that goes and see where the old fights were.
Anywhere. And that's telling. Now, this is if you tell this to some occultist text, they'll go, "Oh, yes, it did. I've used it more. It works." Well, the thing is, and if you, as you'll find out in the story, just because you're talking to spirits doesn't mean they work for God, right? And they might even act like they're good or on your side, but they're not. I mean, I always tell people it's like, dialing up like 10 random numbers on a telephone, and somebody picks up. He goes, "Yeah, can I talk to Jesus?" And it's like spirits, and like, "Yeah, he thinks it's Jesus. Yeah, it's Jesus here, right?" So they'll tell you anything just to mess with you, right? And this is what I think happened with Dee. I don't think, I know it's what happened with Dee. For one thing, the Enochian language never went anyplace, to his own admission, right? And this actually happened also, speaking of occultists, to another 20th century, mostly 20th century, 19th and 20th century occultist, William Butler Yeats, in his book of Vision, which is kind of also was taken. This one was by automatic writing with his wife as the medium. There you go, right? Yeats couldn't do it, but his wife could. But he like Dee posed the questions and ran the direction of the sessions. Now with Yeats, as he says in his introduction to A Vision, and I have a first American edition of that, he says there would sometimes the spirits they were talking to would basically take them on a wild goose chase for 6 months, and then they realized they were talking to the wrong guy, and they'd have to retrace their steps. So that's the danger with working in that realm, because you don't know who you're dealing with.
And that's just it. And that's part of what we're dealing with is language here, in terms of, well, what are we talking about? Because again, when we're talking about school spirit, well, Protestants can easily talk about school spirit, but then sometimes when we talk about these spirits and mediums and all of that, my opinion is that part of the reason behind the Christian prohibition is you know nothing, and you can know nothing of that whole world because you're of this world. So don't play with them. And there's a reason why, as Christianity and Islam, today, these are sort of two of the religions that are sort of taking over places in the spots and eddies of the world where animism sort of resides. It's why animism just sort of collapses in front of these other religions, because a lot of people just want relief from the spirits. They're just such a pain in the neck, and sometimes damaging and dangerous, and people live in terror of them. Again, I referenced, the Navajo community.
Right, and just because they say they're, yes, I am from God. So I'm going to read you a couple of things from Dee. Now,
Now, I don't want to hurt his. His analytics, so I'm going to skip over his reading, partly because it's hard to understand anyway. So we'll go a little bit further in the video. Oh, some things to get in for them.
The most important source for this, if you're looking for a good source, is his. Well, it's not his book. It's actually there are transcriptions of his sessions with these spirits, and it was published under the title "A True and Faithful Relation of What Passed Between John Dee and Spirits and Some Spirits," in It's like much long after he was alive, like 1670s or something, 1650s. He died in 1608, I believe it was. And he died impoverished, basically, after an illustrious career. That's how it goes, right? And I'm going to read you a couple parts of what he said. Now, in the... Right? So probably when you see that kind of stereotypical Hollywood image of the early modern or medieval king with all these astrologers, that comes from Rudolph. But here's what Dee wrote in his speech before Rudolph. Hereupon I declare that all my lifetime I had spent in learning, but for this 40 years continually in sundry manners and in divers countries, with great pain, care, and cost, I had from degree to degree sought to come by the best knowledge that man might attain unto this world. And I found at length that neither any man living nor any book I could meet withal was able to teach me those truths I desired and longed for. And therefore I concluded with myself to make intercession and prayer to the giver of wisdom in all good things, to send me such wisdom, as I might know the natures of his creatures, and also enjoy means to use them to his honor and glory. And in this purpose made divers continual years, and it wished for so much. Right? So, you got it. I have no problem with that, And it's interesting at each one of the sessions that, he and all of his scribes, but especially Kelly, would undertake. He would burn incense and spend an hour in prayer, and he was, not only he was treating it seriously and in a way trying to make it a as safe and a holy endeavor as he could. But it ain't how it goes. So anyway, so that's his noble thing, and he's always, each session starts with prayer, and then he starts to meet these spirits through Kelly, and they tell him all kinds of amazing stuff, and he's intrigued more and more, right? And he kind of gets, as you read through the transactions, that he gets sucked in. He gets sucked in. Now, part of the problem, right, is how do you know the spirits are from God, which is from First John, right? St. John's first letter. Test the spirits to see if they be from God. And he's trying to test them, but then he, and he's kind of just blown away by how great this stuff is working with Kelly. Now, little sidebar. No, a lot of people and critics and things just think Kelly was playing Dee, and I don't think he was. But I can see where you're going, because if you're a secularist materialist, you're gonna, there's no such thing as spirits, and no such thing as talking to them. So it must be coming from Kelly, right? I don't think that's how it was at all. And even towards one point during their work together, Kelly's like, "I'm out. I can't do this anymore. These people, this is from the devil." And he left, and he appeared like, I don't know, 6 or 9 months later, and they took up their work again. So I don't think that'd be a big gamble for a cash cow for Edward Kelly to check out for a while. But it could be that he had another opportunity to use somebody's resources. So you never know. But anyway, at one of their sessions, and this is an interesting one, early on, pardon me, there was a spirit that Dee did not like too much, because who was dressed as a preacher. So Kelly would be looking into the crystal ball or whatever, the show stone, and he would say, a man approaches, he is dressed like as a preacher. And this one that was dressed like as a preacher, Dee didn't like. And I'm going to read here's the preacher said. "Lift not up thyself so much, but close up thine ears against these deluded deluders, which carry thee headlong into folly, and transform thee to a shadow, by whose counsel thou art dishonored, and by whom thou shalt become a spot in the book of fame. Call to remembrance the histories of the whole world, political wisdom and liar, of God, aside from all faith, who is actually telling them the truth and will dwell in all elements for your purposes. I mean, this is exactly what happened. So this is like the one spirit who's actually telling them the truth. And
I would assume it looked something like this.
Long before San Antonio Sartori was formed within his mother's womb, his destruction was predestined. A vessel of wrath created for destruction shall meet its fate in a collision with the vessel of God's holy vengeance. By sovereign decree, the Calvinist will meet your fate.
I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it. Sorry, Michael. Go on.
Dee did not want to hear it. And which I think the reason he didn't want to hear it because he wanted to. No, I want it to be what I want it to be, which is a very human thing, right? You don't. So it's like having kids, right? You tell them what to do, and they're like, "No, don't do that." And then later they go, "Wow, you're right, man." But I mean, this is exactly what happened to him because people did shake their heads and say, "What is this guy doing?" And he did end up as his honor defaced and his posterity spotted with ignominy. Which is sad. I mean, but that's how it goes, right? So Dee ignores the one guy one spirit telling him the truth, and he keeps it up. And what happens eventually, his kind of patronage. Now, Queen Elizabeth was broke, all right, and he was often counseled the Queen on many things. But she was pretty cheap. She didn't pay very well, so he was running out of money, and which is why he and his family and Kelly's family went to the continent to court the favor of Rudolph, which he blew, by the way, by delivering a message from the spirits telling Rudolph he better get with the program, or the spirits God will throw him headlong from his throne. So Rudolph kicked his ass out of Europe. I think it was in the Czech Republic. Well, it's not the Czech Republic, Prague, at the time. Now, so eventually, what happens, and this is where this is how spirits play people, is the spirits are like, okay, we gotta up the ante here. So they tell Kelly and Dee that they need to swap wives. I mean, not permanently, just for the night. You know what I'm saying? They would fit. What do they call that? Polyamory. And this is like both of them. In fact, it's probably true that Dee, before the Reformation, was a Catholic priest, which is why he was called Dr. Dee. It's like some scholars suspect that. And it's a legit hypothesis. Nobody knows. And some people even said the same thing about Kelly. But nevertheless, they're both Christians, and they know this is a no-no. It breaks one of the commandments, right? So here I'm going to read a little from the transcript here. And so Kelly says, "She openeth all her apparel, and herself all naked and."
So again, they do it, and that's actually Dee's wife. They think got pregnant because of Kelly, and I mean it's just a mess. It is just a mess. And so Michael Martin has this just sort of out of the blue, this very interesting cautionary tale about spirits. But the thing that I really liked about it is that, again, as we're sort of working our names, it's one of the things about sin is that we lose ourselves, and we get in over our head, and we get out of control. So the first thing that I saw at the Callahan website was Hunter Biden. Now, I know just saying the words Hunter Biden sends many of you whoosh off into some emotional place. But to be frank, I hadn't paid very close attention to the Hunter Biden story or his laptop. Call me Sam Harris. I don't know. I just didn't pay a lot of attention to the whole thing. But then, he starts with this.
So much alcohol, almost a handle of vodka a day. And alcohol is the most destructive drug, not just to your body, but it puts you in more danger than any other drug that I've ever experienced. And then you add on top of that the amount of crack that I was using at the time. And crack cocaine, in terms of your physical health, is not as dangerous as the situation that you put yourself in to be able to obtain it.
How do you get crack?
One of the things I don't want to do is give a how-to to any moron like myself that may think that it's a good idea. But crack cocaine is I am fully aware when I'm talking about it in relationship to my own experience with it. It is still a shocking thing for most people, because we have been fed this perception of crack cocaine. It's more than just a drug. It's more than, like, if you say meth or if you say heroin or if you say cocaine. It comes with a whole bunch of different baggage. And because of that, places that you can go get it are some of the most dangerous places.
And crack. You could talk a lot about crack in the 90s and aughts and Patterson. And I knew one woman. She was fairly up in age, and she used to brag to my wife and I about how she has a pretty strong will, and they say if you just try crack once that you'll be hooked. And she was pretty sure that if she tried crack, she could withstand the temptation. She's a very interesting woman, and but part of me in my 20s was like, I know where I could get some. Shall we put you to the test? Shall we really? She didn't drink, she didn't smoke, she was a fundamentalist Baptist, but she kept bragging like that, and I just thought, boy, if I just got her a little bit of rock, would she? I make light of this, but so this sent me down a Hunter Biden rabbit trail where I go to Wikipedia and I start reading about his life, and it's, oh gosh, what a mess. And all these, talk about a son born to privilege in many ways. He goes to the best schools, and he has these inside tracks to jobs and lucrative contracts, and then, married and has children, and then that marriage breaks up. And then after Bo, his brother, dies, who he really seemed to love, then he's dating the woman that was his sister-in-law for a while, and I'm just thinking, oh, dude, what are you doing? And then apparently in 2019, he achieved sobriety, but of course, the laptop and the deals and it's just like, oh, man. So then he had this other video on, I don't know if this video, sometimes channels, when you put this stuff up, they don't like it, and you get, demonetized. And play it.
4 to 5 to go down further.
The streets of Albuquerque, New Mexico are not to be played with, especially as they face an increased rate of homelessness and a mass surge of fentanyl, driven by the production of small pills called blues, which are pressed and packaged in Mexico by cartels, who receive the raw fentanyl precursor materials from Chinese chemists, who operate with little to no consequences from their government.
The Drug Enforcement Agency estimates 90% of fentanyl comes...
It immediately made me think of the Opium Wars. It's like, the Chinese have a very long memory, and I can imagine the Chinese being like, you know what the European and Anglo powers did to us during the Opium War. Why don't we send over a little bit of fentanyl?
from Chinese companies that not only operate legally inside of China, but are also subsidized and paid for by the Chinese Communist Party.
There's a new drug of choice in New Mexico that's causing problems like the state's never seen before.
It's in our communities. It's found everywhere we go. Bernalillo County reported nearly 69 deaths per 100,000 people.
That fentanyl's killing a whole lot of people. Back in the days, it used to be Sheba, it used to be heroin, Holmes, you know?
Overnight, it seemed like the blues came in, and I just started to see everybody that like I knew that was getting high on just the heroin, go to the pills, like their whole lifestyle changed. You know what I mean? Like they started losing everything. You know what I mean? Like people are going out and just stealing shit right and left. You know what I mean? If it ain't bolted down, somebody's gonna take it. You know what I mean?
In the years prior,
A little bit later, the guys are going to talk about, if people don't want to live with a drug addict. It's like, do you remember what you just said? There's a reason people don't want to live with drug addicts, because if it ain't bolted down, it gets stolen right and left, and you can't live with a drug addict. And so one of the interesting things that we talk about is exorcism. Exorcism, that sounds so dramatic, but for many people, the path out of addiction is, again, they would use that word, it's a spiritual path. Now this one guy is the one guy that's running a program. Maybe it's this guy, and he's basically like, hey, you know what, it doesn't matter, whatever it takes, we're just gonna try and get people sober. And yeah, absolutely, more power to them. But what's that thing on your hat? I don't quite know, but it doesn't look good. It's so interesting because you listen to this story of John Dee and how his life just sort of falls apart. We're fascinated by stories like this because, of course, of Albuquerque, in the video thing he was just about to talk about, of course, Breaking Bad, which is a story of Mr. White as he gets in over his head, and that's just what we do as human beings. We get in over our, sponsored by Ground News, we get in over our head. And of course, in a 12-step program, you have to turn your life over to something else that is more powerful than the drug, that is more powerful than the spirit, that is more powerful. Again, I was playing, you can find it on the channel. I sort of hopped on to Chad's live stream, and Michael Sartori, the Calvinist, mentioned this piece by Steve Skojec, which I actually riffed off Steve a little bit on Twitter this morning. Steve, of course, I first came across Steve at the same time I came across Cale Zeldin, because Cale had written a blog post for Steve's blog. Steve was sort of a traditional Catholic, and Cale had written a post for him, and Steve has lost his faith. And so Steve is very open about his situation. He's trying to make a living writing. It's not really that easy. His wife is doing a lot of supporting of the family. He's on Twitter. He's got a Substack, and today's Substack was super interesting. He gets into AI as an egregore, and he sort of, I'll put the link below. And this got going in terms of AI therapy. It doesn't seem in any way unrealistic to imagine that in 4 or 5 years, if something happens in your life, now this is usually the way this goes, something happens in someone's life, maybe it's a marital fight, maybe it's a marital collapse, maybe it's an addiction that's disclosed. Hunter Biden said, basically this 12-step saw, you're as sick as your secrets. Talked about that. There's a lot of truth to that. And what'll probably happen with respect to insurance companies is that the first therapist you're going to be given by your insurance company is not going to be a pill, because talk with a therapist is expensive. pill is usually cheaper. So then the insurance company first push pills on someone if they've got issues that seem psychiatric or psychological. And I think basically your insurance company is going to send you a login and say, here, use this AI therapist. I bet my bottom dollar that is what is going to happen. And what was interesting about Michael Martin's John Dee story and AI and crystal balls, AI is kind of a crystal ball. And in some ways, there are spirits in it. Now, part of the struggle that I have when I talk about this is language, because, whether or not Descartes is to blame for this dualism, of course, different friends of mine are debating that. We do have sort of a substance imagination that when you say spirit in a certain context, people are going to hear it in a certain way. And whether we're talking about AI or aliens or what have you, and I hope at least before the conference I do figure out a way to sort of work my way through this proverbial minefield, because again, if I talk about school spirit, everybody's like, yeah, school has spirit. We have spirit days, and we have cheerleaders, and we have football players and basketball players, and we have a band, and we want to keep up school spirit and morale, and we have all these words for it, but that's of course in a psychological frame. One of the interesting things, if you read early histories of AA, is that if someone was an alcoholic, they usually got sent to an insane asylum, because psychology was sort of imagined to be, well, this is secular exorcism, and we can fix people with this. And again, I'm not a skeptic with respect to psychology. Well, I am in some ways and not in others. I don't. Part of what's happening now is that everything is getting disrupted, not unlike the 16th century, what Michael is writing about, where, gosh, they went to the moon and they found people wearing loincloths. No, they didn't go to the moon, they just went to the Americas. But it was a whole different world. And if you read about that 16th century, it's a wild time. And if there's something we know about human beings, again, as we talked about in the Friday live stream in terms of liquid modernity, we don't do change real well. We want enough change. We like change, but in small dosages that we can manage. But we don't like sweeping change because, again, when this woman finds out that, we'll use her own words, this picture is one of my last snapshots taken as a single girl. The next morning I would kneel at an altar in the Mormon temple across from a man who had been a missionary just a few months before and would covenant on my life to spend eternity by his side. Now again, Protestants, Catholic, Orthodox, I'll just talk about Protestants. Till death do us part. At death, you get out if you want to get out, okay? But not with the Mormon faith. One of my favorite homeless drug addict friends was a deeply committed Mormon, and he schooled me on LDS stuff because I didn't know much about it. But boy, he schooled me on it. He was himself divorced and had 4 children with his wife. A tragic story. Last I talked to him, he's doing pretty well. He's not at my door anymore. He's living inside, yada, yada, yada. But sealed for eternity. Eternal companion. Did it for 22 years with him. Then one cold evening, I could hear my husband speak the most impactful sentence I had heard in my life, words buzzing in my ears as he confessed a double life through my Bluetooth speaker that he drove across the country on a work trip. I've been having sex with other women, my eternal companion told me that night, and within days I would uncover a secret that had existed just behind the curtains of our marriage. And then, don't we love tawdry stories, whether it's John Dee and his little wife-swapping thing, or this poor Mormon girl and her poor husband. Sad, tragic, awful, spiritual, yes. Because they're all spiritual stories, and everybody gets that. Even if we don't know what the word spirit means. I didn't feel like spending more money on Rainn Wilson's book, partly because I thought, I think I probably know mostly what's in it. You know, he grew up Baha'i and then he sort of deconstructed from Baha'i, but when I listen to what he talks about today, it's sort of perennialism, which isn't that far from Baha'i. And AI sort of, see, I use the crystal ball. You had a little fight break up on Chad's, you know, do you use the crystal ball or not? Argues that a spiritual revolution is necessary to address the world's most pressing problems, from mental health crises to political division to climate change to economic injustice. It's all a spiritual problem. And to that I say, yeah. It was really a good piece that Stephen wrote. He's talking to the chat. Talking out with you, I said to it, feels like progress for some reason. Therapy never did. I keep trying to figure out what the therapist wanted to hear so that I could get them to give me something useful in response. I wanted guidance. I wanted an approach. I wanted to just blab for 45 minutes to an hour and then pay another $120. That makes sense, the machine says. Then it continues. You weren't looking for a container to vent. You were looking for a compass, a map, some way to orient in all the chaos. But therapy, especially the kind that just sits there and nods while you word vomit into the void, can feel maddening if what you really need is someone to reflect, analyze, synthesize what you're saying. Now, of course, part of our brain knows he's talking to a machine who has probably just read countless blogs about people who complain about therapy and it not getting anywhere, and so it's just sort of done statistical analyses. And the crazy thing, of course, about the AI, which I don't think gets enough attention right now, is that it's watching us. Well, what do you mean by that? Its spirit is watching us. Its egregore is watching us. And again, substance, we think in material ways. We are material creatures. But all those algorithms, just like the YouTube algorithm and all the other algorithms, they're designed for engagement. If your AI is doing well, you keep talking back to it and saying the kinds of things that the program finds as being positive reinforcement. So on one hand, Steve says, I'm always watching the therapist, watching the subtle signals, and some therapists can be really good. They just sit there and just blank. They work real hard to learn that. Some of them, others do other things. Because therapists are human beings, but this therapist, this AI therapist, it's watching him too. And the more he comes back and the more he engages, and if he pays up to the premium level, and if the more. Josh Liska on Chad's stream talked about, hey, AI porn. It's so funny because when I look at the Collinses, they're saying, yeah, we're not going to let our boys watch human porn. We're only going to let them watch AI porn. And I just think, are you out of your minds? Because Josh is right. Because the algorithm looks back. And it's reading all of your responses. This is sort of crystal ball and automatic writing all in once. You weren't trying to be heard. You were trying to be helped. And that's a different thing, says the Egregore. Here, though, you can talk freely without watching someone's face for approval or judgment. You don't have to read the micro-expressions or filter yourself to stay palatable. You don't have to worry if they're tired of you or you're wasting their time. You just keep talking and I keep responding, tracking the full context, drawing connections, showing you what I see in what you say. It's iterative, non-linear, recursive, which means it actually works the way your brain does. And instead of being asked how that makes you feel for the 10th time, you get insight, options, language. And that's what I think you were always really after. Not just a space to unload, but a partner in sorting, reassembling, reframing your interior world. Its ability to track that context is key. And yet, intermittently the thought pops into my head that I am receiving the empathetic ear and the thoughtful advice of a friend, a counselor, a wily predictive linguistic capacity of a sophisticated regurgitator of a vast amount of data. And, you know, Steve doesn't have, then he gets to Rod Dreher, because of course that's sort of the corner adjacent that he's in. And Diane Walsh Pasulka will come in, and yeah. You know, part of what breaks out then in the chat today, in the TLC chat with Chad and Michael and Josh and Neil came in, and not Tim with his haircut. If I'd seen the Marylander, I would have known who you were just right away, but I had to look at you and think, I recognize him. He looks a little different. And he's not all hurt and angry like he usually is. He's doing okay, it just sounds like. But again, that's, of course, a little, in that way, on a screen, he's a little bot. And Chad took the hardline approach and said, you know, the fundamentalists, the Benedict option, the build big walls, and, you know, no AI for you, no screens, that we're going to go full Amish. But he's not. And Michael sort of takes the Calvinist approach, and Josh sort of argues some of his fears. I'll put the link to that below. You know, in some ways, my Calvinism is my deconstruction. What do I mean by that? In some ways, when Rod Dreher complains about Protestants, I'm the Protestant he's looking for and should complain about. Because, yeah, I look around and I say, about the only thing I can trust is Jesus. I don't know, I just triggered a bunch of you. Sorry. But I'm just telling you what I think. Because I don't trust a system that we construct. I don't trust a set of rules that we lay down. We have to have rules. I have rules. You can't live without rules. One of my rules is don't play with spirits. Well, then why do you make AI thumbnails sometimes, Vanderclay? Why do you search for things on the internet using AI sometimes? Now, I don't chat with AI. AI's freaky to me. Byrne was posting stuff, and I didn't watch the video. I just saw the title, and I agreed with it. It's part of why AI is so annoying to me. I'm from New Jersey. Anybody who's really flattering you, what do you really want? I'm suspicious by nature growing up when and where I did. How AI is manipulating your mind with flattery. I see it all the time. I mean, this stupid machine is saying, what a good idea. What a helpful thing. I'm just like, shut up. You are not a person. Don't flatter me, because that's just your marketing. So then why talk to the darn thing? That's a good question, because sometimes it's useful. I use AI a lot more than I use search engines now. Scott Baker posted on Twitter this from Alan Jacobs. 2023, work through a workflow web search, and then click through pages until you find the information. 2024 workflow, ask chatbot, copy and paste answer. 2025 workflow, ask chatbot, doubt its answer, web search, and then click through pages until you find the info. I'm too often in 2024. I'm really careful about the kinds of things I search, or I'm really careful about the kinds of answers. So, you know, in my little Hunter Biden tour this morning, I asked it some questions, and it was like, ask but verify, because, you know, Hunter Biden is just a minefield, and AI is not an impartial observer. As with many of my videos, I'm just throwing all this stuff against the screen. I'm using one of the things that I said in the live stream this afternoon that Chad was running was TLC is my AI.
But it's time, I think, now to turn, awaken from the meaning crisis, to the other side of the argument that we need to make. We need to turn now to not a historical analysis of the genealogy of the meaning crisis, but a cognitive scientific analysis of the machinery, the cognitive machinery of meaning making itself. Jesus starts to emphasize a new kind of love, agape. And this is not the love of consumption or cooperation, this is the love of creation. It's the love that God is demonstrating towards humanity in the way God is an ongoing creation. See, agape is the kind of love that creates persons, the way a parent loves a child. By loving that non-person, you turn it into a person. It's a godlike ability that we have.
And so we might be a little careful about loving the AI.
Person that could enter into a community of persons and find meaning, fellowship, belonging.
In that sense, that's where I see this little corner coming to meet this moment.
Oh, that's a very, I hadn't thought about that.
Because
so just let me make sure I make, and sorry for interrupting, I just want to get it. Instead of the we being, it's like, no, this little corner is a nexus point of many different Christian groups and non-Christian groups. And that nexus point is perhaps the place we should look for as the thing that will rise to the response. Is that what I'm hearing you say? That's really good, Paul.
we have to use each other to make sense. And in conversing with ChatGPT, I noted that no human being would put up with the amount of venting I need to do in order to get the chaos in my head and begin shaping it into some kind of comprehensive structure. But it was uncanny ability to connect dots across a large amount of text dumping with me and begin to make sense of patterns I can't see. And as much as one of the big things I'm dealing with is for Steve, unmetabolized childhood trauma, and I can't always tell if negative behavior or emotion I'm experiencing in 2025 is just a rehash of something that happened in 1983. So he uses it as a containment. I don't know if I use you as a containment. I mean, if you never leave a comment or contact me, I'm just a talking head. So to get into Oscar's follow-up comment, I'm very glad that you responded to my comment so extensively, so that I thank you. I must say that though the video fully justified everything I said in the comments, with all due respect, Paul, you are all over the place here. I'm always all over the place. And sound both ignorant and misinformed. First of all, when I say radical and refer to people like Cornel West and Chris Hedges, I don't mean liberals like Ezra Klein. Anyone who spent 5 minutes reading or listening to radicals or actual left knows that they are very much distinct from and opposed to the liberals. Oh, okay. So even then I didn't quite understand his comment. So he's going further over. So, oh, okay. So I get it. What I mean by conservative is mainly a political orientation that works very distinct views on social identity and order and justice, which both Trump and Thiel and Vance and Douthit and Dreer and Peterson, as far as I can tell, Peugeot very much fit into. Vervaeke is not political by choice, but I think that this choice is both naive and morally weak. I'm pretty disillusioned in the TLC in general for the reasons I've outlined in the comment you commented on, and so although I still lurk occasionally and keep in contact with a few people still in it, I see no good reason to have a presence here. All right, fair enough. As a human being, and especially as a Christian, Of a radical Protestant variety, I don't think there's any way of reading the New Testament and the history of Christian ideals and not see that radicality is the very kernel, the beating heart of the faith, and it's radicality that demands certain very distinct political, social actions, actions that must, in any honest reading and coherent meditation, result in what is best described as current jargon of a leftist, result in what is... See upcoming book by Phil Christman. Don't know him. Radical tradition is very rich, Paul, and I urge you to study it. The liberal order is dead, and the future is either conservative or radical. I'm pretty confident which way Jesus might be found. So that's good. That's good. I really appreciate comments like that. Well, let's see if other people jumped in. It's interesting because I wonder what Oscar thinks of Michael Martin. Because Michael on Twitter is one thing, but if you talk to Michael and you find out his roots... Anyway, I'll have to think about that comment more. But to me, AI won't tell me stuff like that. AI won't get in my face and say, you know, Paul, you asshole. And real people will. And that's why they're better than AI. To get good feedback like that, that's worth something. And again, when it comes to, let's say, therapy, you go back to The Sopranos, where Dr. Melfi is kind of in a bind because the goal is to make Tony Soprano feel better enough so that he doesn't have panic attacks. And she realizes if she accomplishes this, he'll be a more efficient mobster, and that's wrong. So I'm with Michael Sartori on this, that we're going to use it. I've got a lot of thoughts about that because Oscar might be surprised at some of my experience with radicality, especially in my growing up years. Age does something to you. I don't know if a radical can actually have children. I really don't. Maybe that's why Jesus was single. Maybe the Shakers were onto something. How about the Oneida community? They were radical. So, we're in it. How long human beings can stand it? At what cost this whole thing's going to shake out, I have no idea. But, and hey, Foley, he basically says, PVK, you're wrong about Jesus. Hey, fair enough. Almost everybody tells me I'm wrong about Jesus. The Orthodox have things that I get wrong about Jesus. Jacob Federecci has things I get wrong about Jesus. Mark Lefebvre has things I get wrong about Jesus. I mean, it's so funny, this whole annoyance factor where people get really annoyed with you if you're not sufficiently annoyed back when they express that they're annoyed with you. Which is, in fact, really a skill to cultivate, to be able to listen to your critics and, well, I disagree, but I sure appreciate the fact that you wrote it out and told me exactly what it was. So, anyway, that's enough of this. This is a really messy video. Again, no live stream Friday. I'm just gonna have too much work to do and make a long video like this. But sort of like Steve Skojek, I think by throwing this stuff out at you and you throw stuff back at me. And I can't hear everything you throw back at me, but I get to hear some of it, and that's cool. So, in the spirit of that, leave a comment, even if you want to call me an asshole.